Good morning, y'all. Can you hear that? Can you hear that? Yay. Thank you. Yeah, morning voices. Thank you. Well, good morning. It's really awesome to be in this room with y'all. It seems like that's something we used to take for granted, right? That we could be in a room with people, but we were just talking. I'm not sure that this particular group, other than one celebration, ever met much in person, right? I think we were doing this work initially, this work around the Heading Home plan, during a time when protocols were just a little bit different. So really happy to be here. Tina Peterson from the Community Foundation, and you want to?
Efrat Rosser. I'm now the Bloomington Township trustee, but when we started on this work, I was heading up United Way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so Mary Morgan asked us to kick off today's event to get some of the background out of the way, so the stuff you really, were here to learn can take center stage after we just give everybody a little bit of level setting. And so first, I thought it might make sense for us just to step back a little bit farther than even the work that we began together, many of you populating the working group, in 2020. So in my mind, the work that we are today so immersed in really began in 2013. And some of you were in this space in 2013, and some of you might not have been. But that was when we really developed version 1, right, of what we call the Heading Home plan for our community. And it was, like this last time, a very inclusive community process where we engaged many, many people in these conversations about how we make homelessness rare, brief, and non-repeating. Forrest was so very engaged in that process. You don't have PTSD about that in any way, do you? The many, many charrettes and community conversations that we had really that led us to creating what we really felt like was a very good strategy for our community. When we then fast forward to when we again engage in this process, we had the opportunity to look back and reflect upon what we had really accomplished in that process and then with this new plan. And I think that you can disagree with me if you'd like to, but I feel like while some very good work was done, right, by those who dedicate their life to this work every day, when we evaluated the process we'd made, and we had a small group of individuals as we first came together in 2020 to talk about this, where we were asked by some of the folks in our community, leadership in the community, to step back post, some of the housing conversations we were having due to COVID and think about the bigger plan once again. I think as we evaluated that plan, we found that we had made some progress in some very key areas. They were in areas where we had organizations dedicated to doing that work every single day. But some of those things that really required a community-wide response, some of those things that really I would think of in the healthcare vernacular as social determinants, right? We just hadn't found a way to own. Right? The community wasn't owning those parts of the plan. And so as I think we went into this process, first as a small group and then through our large working group, to think about what the Heading Home plan should look like in its second iteration, we realized it was not going to be successful if we only asked people what they thought, which we had done the first time, but rather that we needed to really engage them in the process of helping to define the solutions. And to me, that's what I think made this particular process so powerful. And it really comes back to the working group, right? The so many people that stood up and said, I want to be part of this conversation. I will come to many Zoom meetings, and I will be on one of the working groups. And so we had 3 working groups. One of them was focused on promising practices. That was led by Emily Pike and by, Lindsay Smith. Everybody's great friend, Lindsay Smith. We also had a committee on looking at data, and that was Forrest Gilmore and Dana from Wheeler. And then finally, we had a group that looked at what we were calling mapping and gapping. right? Mapping and gapping was about what we soon learned was a more difficult task than we anticipated, but really looking at, right, what are the resources we have in terms of housing individuals in our community, and where do they exist, and what can they offer, and who do they serve? And so that was Beverly Calendar Anderson and Angie Purdy from the county, so City County really taking the leadership on that. And from that really intense work, right, you will begin to see that some real, I think, foundational tenets arose, right, from that work that we began to understand needed to be embedded in this next plan. It was going to allow us not only to continue supporting the great work that is being done by nonprofit agencies, but making sure that we were taking a collective approach as a community to addressing all of the pieces that are necessary in order for us to really tackle what has to be one of the most challenging issues for not only individuals but communities as a whole. And so I'm just excited to be in this room now where you will begin to see today, as you hear from Afra and then Mary and Tatiana, how what we learned in that process is coming to life, right? Is being really embedded within the strategies that we are now employing as a community. It's hard work, and it's not work that happens particularly quickly when you're dealing with things that we might think of as social determinants. But I feel like we are on a path that's really going to continue to prove meaningful as we tackle a really difficult challenge for many in our community.
Thanks, Tina. So one of the, I think, aha moments as we were
We haven't been using the slides at all.
yeah, I know. I'll get us there in a minute. As we were evaluating that 2013 plan, was that there really, if we were going to do this right as a community, we really needed to invest resources in it, right? Someone has to own it. People have to be on it every day working as their full-time jobs, and that takes funding, of course. So let's see. Yeah, we had some interested parties, notably the City of Bloomington and Monroe County, as well as Community Foundation and United Way of Monroe County, and a couple of our townships, Perry and Bloomington, who were saying we're willing to dedicate resources to this. That ended up being our advisory council that helped us gather, marshal those resources to implement the plan, and continues to meet monthly now with Mary and Tatiana in order to sort of guide the strategic vision of the plan and make sure that we're able to meet our goals. The city dedicated a considerable amount of ARPA funds, and the county did as well. And those commitments helped us hire first Mary Morgan in, that was December of 2021. She came on full-time, housed at United Way, but supported by the Community Foundation, United Way, and these other funders, of course. And then as Mary got her feet wet, she led the process to hire the Assistant Director for Housing Security, Tatiana Wheeler. So with that, the work could begin in full. There was a lot to do in those early months. There's even more to do now. And one of the things that really helped set up the framework for how we'd be doing this work, not just the heading home plan, all the different things in it, but there was a recommendation from one of those committees to explore membership in something called Built for Zero. It's a national model and a national effort underway, and that committee of promising practices spoke with other communities who had joined and worked with them. did a lot of research before coming back and making that recommendation to us. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mary and Tatiana to talk more about that. But just wanted to give you a little bit of that overview of the leadership behind it and the timeline. And really, these two individuals, are you coming up here so I can introduce you? Or again, dedicating their 40-plus hours each week to making sure that we are moving towards a community where homelessness is rare, brief, and non-repeating. I can't say enough wonderful things about both of them, the experiences you each brought, the leadership you demonstrate every day in getting our community together behind an issue that is, can be challenging for us to all agree on different facets of it, but I think we found that we do all agree that it needs to be solved. And that's where the commonalities are, right? No matter what we think about why or how, we agree this is an issue that we all want to see solved, improved. And you two do a beautiful job of always keeping us thinking about that. But as you'll see in the slides to come, they are just top-notch professionals. I won't say anymore, I'll spoil it. I'll let you all be impressed. So Mary, I'll let you and Tatiana speak about Built for Zero and take it from here.
I'm going to use a wireless mic because I'm restless, but can we first give a round of applause to Tina and Efrat for their leadership in this effort? Truly, this would not have happened without their leadership. I'd also like to recognize Penny Githens, who is, as you saw, one of Heading Home's advisory council members and really supportive in many ways, including coming to events like this. So here we go, guys. We're going to do a very quick overview of some of these, some of the work that we've been doing. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the structure of this. We have framed this, actually this was Efrat's suggestion, around the plan. This QR code will take you to the Heading Home plan, or there are copies of the plan on your tables. So we hope you can follow along. Our work is basically going to be defined by how it connects with the plan, but then we're also going to talk about some of the work that's related but wasn't necessarily in the plan. We have talked about the need to update the plan already, probably do that next year. This has been a fantastic start, but there is a lot of work still to be done. So with that, I'm going to start talking about Built for Zero. Efrat mentioned this. This was something that the Promising Practices Working Group had identified as a key priority. We are the first community in Indiana to be part of this national network, which really helps us by providing a framework and connection to other communities that are working to end homelessness. This is based on Housing First, as is our Heading Home plan. So we're trying to move people as quickly as possible into housing while also addressing their other needs if they have them. We are, as I said, the first and only so far community in Indiana to be part of Built for Zero. This is a picture from our first conference in May of last year, and some of you community partners are in this room. Everything we do is in partnership, and so we have Forrest Gilmore from Beacon, Melissa Burgess from HealthNet. You'll see also Danielle Sorden, who's our region's coordinated entry lead and also works at Beacon. Tatiana and I, Bob Goodrum from Wellspring in Martinsville, because this is a regional effort. And we've added, later this year, we're adding consultants with lived experience as well to round out our group. So we have been working in many different areas, but one of them that I'm going to pass along to Tatiana to discuss is our data work, which is foundational to everything we're doing.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. So I know data is usually not something that's fun, but I have come to learn to love data because without data, we wouldn't really know what's going on, right? So I'm going to try to make this as interactive as possible. So a big thing that Built for Zero tells communities to do is to create something that's called a by name list. A by name list is, like its name, a list of everyone in a community experiencing homelessness by name. So something that we've been doing as a region is trying to make our by name list as accurate as possible, right? So we're getting all the different social service providers together to make sure that their lists are up to date, to make sure our general community's coordinated entry system, which I'll talk about a little bit later, has their clients all up to date. Because a lot of people want to know how many people are experiencing homelessness, how many people are moving into housing, how many people are facing barriers to housing, et cetera. So our data is really important to explain all of those things. So back in June of 2022 is when we first started to begin pulling these regional data reports. Prior to heading home, each individual agency had their own understanding and narratives of the data. But because of Mary and I's work, we've been able to look at a region approach towards our data. So in June, we started our first data reporting. And then from June to November, we started just looking at all the different metrics, like the length of time from someone experiencing homelessness to when they've been housed. How long did that take? What were the median? What were the averages of people being housed? We started to look at that there are some data discrepancies, right? Not all agencies were reporting into this community or regional-wide by name list. So we started making regional policy changes to kind of address some of these issues. So that happened around in November. One of those things was that we created a thing that's called an inactive policy, which basically says that if a person in our community hasn't talked to a case manager in over 90 days, and they're going to be exited from the system, they can always be re-entered, but we want to make sure that that by name list is accurate and up to date. And then in January, we started making data-informed decisions. So we started to think, we can't just report metrics and data, but we have to do something with the data that we're collecting. So we implemented a thing called veteran case conferencing, which I'll explain in the next slide. And then this originally said August, but I think Mary and I are still talking about it. But we're hoping to make this data public to you all in our general community, because there's a lot of people always asking questions about the data, but people have different understandings and perspectives given their respective agencies and their respective philosophies even. So we're hoping to kind of address some of those information asymmetries by creating a public data dashboard. Hopefully, maybe by the end of August, we're working with our Built for Zero coaches to work through some of those logistics. So one of the most fun parts of my job with Mary is meeting new people. And this group of people that you see, and it's not all inclusive because some people are on that computer in the background, are a bunch of local world changers. These are the different individuals who are working to end veteran homelessness. So every other week, this group of people are meeting to discuss every veteran in our community experiencing homelessness. They're identifying what are their barriers to housing, how long have they been experiencing homelessness, and how can we as an interagency group bring all of our resources to the table to address those barriers and move them more quickly into housing. So part of our work with Built for Zero, they charge each community with choosing a population to focus on ending homelessness for. And our community chose to focus on veterans, given the different resources that they have. So like I said, we meet every other week. Since starting this in January, we've been able to house 16 veterans. Can I get a clap for that, for all the people working to do that? That's awesome. So like I said, we've housed 16 veterans. We still have veterans that we're working with, but we're excited as we progress to ending veteran homelessness. And I'm happy to answer any questions later in the slides about things related to data. And I will turn it over to Mary to talk about making homelessness rare.
Thanks, Tot. All right, so here we go into the plan itself. We are going to start with the first goal, making homelessness rare. Strategy 1 is something that we have made some progress on: increase housing stock for low-income households and people in poverty. And because we go from goal to strategy to objective, we have put down at the bottom the objective for each of these projects, just so you can kind of keep track of those as you're following along. And also because Heading Home is not a direct service provider, and we work very strongly with our community partners, we're going to be including community efforts that are being addressed, as well as our own efforts at Heading Home. Summit Hill Community Development Corp is relatively recently formed. It was formed earlier this year. They are expanding affordable housing in Bloomington and Monroe County. And one of the things that we're really excited about that they're doing is a community land trust. I'm on the board of Summit Hill doing some of that formation work. This is going to allow the land trust to own the land and then provide affordable housing to our low-income neighbors. So we're very excited about this, and it's being led by Nate Ferreira, who is a phenomenal person and used to work at Habitat for Humanity. Moving on to strategy 2, incentivize landlords to prioritize low-income housing. We are partnering with, again, agencies in the area, and one of the things that we're planning in August is a landlord appreciation breakfast. We really believe that there's a lot of opportunity to expand the network of landlords who are opening up their units to people who have housing vouchers. We need to support the ones who are already doing that, and there are several that our agency partners are working with. But we think that there's a lot of opportunity to educate and support and really strategize with landlord partners. And so we're embarking on that. This is part of Objective 1, creating an outreach and education program for apartment associations, landlords, property managers. Moving on. Part of our strategy is to support the Landlord Risk Mitigation Program. This was specifically called out in Objective 2 for Goal 1, Strategy 2. And this is something that the Bloomington Housing Authority has launched earlier this year. It's supported by funding from Heading Home. The original Landlord Risk Mitigation Fund was only for the city of Bloomington, so we provided funds that could allow it to expand into the rest of Monroe County outside of Bloomington city limits. This is really a fund that is an incentive for landlords. It's kind of a security net or an insurance policy, if you will. So if a landlord is kind of on the fence about renting to somebody with a housing voucher, they can participate in this risk mitigation fund, and if something happens that is out of the ordinary, if there's damage to the apartment that exceeds the security deposit, for example, then the landlord can tap this fund. Now, we don't anticipate that it will be used because, by and large, the vast majority of people who are tenants do not have any issues, but this is a way to basically say to landlords, you know, if you're feeling uneasy, this is a way to really try and reassure you. We're also, in this same Objective 3, utilize incentives for landlords to accept Section 8 vouchers. We've partnered with the BHA to create a couple of videos. One talking to landlords about the benefits that they see and the reasons that they see for accepting tenants with vouchers. And a second video that looks at tenants and really hears their stories, asks them about how transformational it was to have secure housing. And these videos are really very moving, and we're going to be rolling them out in partnership with BHA. This is something that's longer term. Last year we applied for a grant through IU Health that we did not get, but we still are going to try this project on a smaller scale, and that's a rental renovation program. Basically, the idea behind it is to provide funds to landlords to renovate some of their units that may not be habitable now or may not be in great condition in exchange for establishing master leases with agencies that are working directly with our low-income neighbors. And then again, this is a different objective, create a landlord real estate agent network. It relates to what I talked about earlier. The kickoff breakfast we're having in late August will really be the start of what we hope will be ongoing collaboration with landlords. We view this as great potential for peer-to-peer recruitment, so supporting landlords who are already accepting tenants with vouchers and encourage them to interact with other landlords and bring more landlords on board for this process. And moving on to strategy 3, initiate practices to assist households in preventing homelessness. And now I'd like to give a shout out to Tanda Radawan, who is here in the audience. The Eviction Prevention Project, which is a community effort that she is responsible for, is an amazing, she does an amazing job at working with people who are at risk of eviction and giving them resources and guidance to help them navigate that process. We provided some funding and then are really hoping to collaborate to find a long-term sustainable way to keep this project going. So thank you, Tanda. Yay, Tanda. Let's clap for Tanda. Strategy 4, expand healthcare access. And I'm going to give a shout out to someone else in the room. This is a community effort, the HealthNet Homeless Initiative Program. Melissa Burgess is in charge of this for Bloomington. And Melissa is also on our Built for Zero team. They came to Bloomington about 2 years ago, and have been doing street outreach and street medicine and have just been really amazing in transforming our approach to providing medical care for people experiencing homelessness. And this addresses our objective 1 and 3 in Goal 1, Strategy 4. So this is a picture of the team, including a couple of outreach workers who just do an amazing job. So thank you, Melissa. Okay, now I get to pause. We're building in some time because we have thrown a lot at you. After each of our discussions of the work that we've done related to goals, we would like to get your feedback. And we'd also like to hear if we're not capturing some of the things in our plan that you think are happening in the community that we can pull out and highlight, or if there are questions you have, or just basically some time to reflect. So I'm going to open it up and see if anybody has any questions or feedback or comment. Many of you were instrumental in that early work, so just wanting to hear from you about, how you think things are going, particularly for this first goal. Yeah, Deborah.
So in terms of making housing stock available to folks, what are the vacancy rates that we're dealing with, and what do we need to move the needle on that to make more options available for people in need of housing?
So your question is, in a nutshell, what are the vacancy rates and how do we make more units available? Okay. John Zodi here, Director of HAND. You may have more information that's current than I do. The last I heard, vacancy rates were like around 2%. Okay. So with vacancy rates around 2%, and that is in the city of Bloomington, but I think we can extrapolate to Monroe County, obviously that creates a very limited supply of housing that's available to anyone. So some of the programs that we described here are designed to work with landlords who may have some units available that are not being rented, or that they are being rented to others and they could be rented to people with vouchers, and incentivize them to open those units to low-income neighbors. So I feel like I'm not getting at your question, though.
That's terrific, especially if there's units that are offline that
Right.
could be brought back online in terms of, I don't know if there's any way to gauge picture longer term of how do we increase, again, in this case, the number of rental units to, let's say, get at a 7% vacancy instead of 2% vacancy, so that we've got more room in the housing market to be able to house people.
Right.
So just, and again, you all are doing an amazing job, a lot of different things, just in the series of slides that you've shown, and of course the scope of the Heading Home plan, but just trying to kind of get to some numbers of how do we get to where we've got the vacancies we need in the market to house people.
Right. That's a tough nut, right? One of the things that we're hoping as we look at the market is that with several thousand new units coming on board in the next year or so, there at some point we believe there's going to be a tipping point where some of the older housing stock will become less desirable for, frankly, students in Monroe County who might be moving into some of the newer housing stock, and that gives us an opportunity. The last I went to a Monroe County Apartment Association meeting earlier this year, and they said there were going to be, I think it was 3,000 new units coming on this year into Monroe County. So that's a significant amount. Will that be a tipping point? I don't know. Yeah, Tanda?
I guess a follow-up question, with you noting the thousands of units that are going to be coming on the market. Is there a plan, or are we looking at having that data available? Because I know when I looked on the affordable housing page, there were some graphics that were available from like 2016 to 2019. But I'm wondering if there's any more information on that would be helpful for the community to show what's being planned, what the units are they affordable, are they workforce housing, are they low-income housing, and if that's part of the data component that that the Heading Home group is looking at. I think that'd be really useful information, so then we could just look and see, oh, in what areas are they, what category of housing are they, and that way we can see it and have a better idea of what's going on.
Yeah. That's not the initial focus of our data, but I think that's a good point. And John, you are.
I was just going to say, however we can help supplement that data, we're happy to do. We've got some of that time at the city about what, what's been approved for construction, what's sort of already online, what's coming online. So we're currently inspecting the complex out by Target that's being constructed, the one that replaced the brownstones, and then the one over here on the annex. The annex, it's called the annex. It's right at 3rd and Grant. So 3 big complexes are currently undergoing inspection by our department. So there's going to be a lot more units coming online. Most of them are market rate. Some have workforce housing in them, but we have that data in the hand department if we ever need to sort of collaborate if you have questions.
Great.
Maybe on the website, to have that available for the public to see,
Yeah,
the community to see.
it should be there. We should talk and
Okay.
make sure you're going to the right place because we have that in some form on the website. So
Awesome.
make sure it's-
Okay. My friends at CATS are probably killing me because I haven't been passing the mic. So I'm going to pass the mic now to Tina.
Awesome. I guess I just want to comment that I mentioned this briefly, but this is one of the challenges we found in that MAP and GAP committee, right? When we were doing this work earlier. This is a very difficult task that we haven't figured out how to tackle yet, but we need to. And I'm wondering if Built for Zero has any suggestions on how communities are able to really manage. It's really an inventory, strategy, and you have to have people that are voluntarily willing to sort of help provide that information to get a really complete picture. And so I think we continue to see that this is an important piece of us being able to solve some of the issues we're addressing, but it's really difficult. I think we were all surprised when we were doing the planning work on how very difficult it was. That committee, I think, eventually just said the tools don't exist right now to do this. So I think thinking about how we can be helpful in developing those tools as a bigger group would be really important.
Thank you. Totally agree. And while Built for Zero primarily focuses on data related to people experiencing homelessness, one of the great things about that organization is it can connect us with other community partners in other parts of the country who are facing similar challenges. Great. Yes.
I have a question that's sort of kind of a combination of all of this. In terms of your data that you've collected, is it, and I may have missed this, is it broken down so that you know the reason for the homelessness? So that you can see that. And then the other part of that question is, I wonder if anybody in this community or any committee or whatever has looked at people who have been in prison. They really struggle with finding a place to live because the background check gets checked and automatically they're thrown out, even if the crime that they committed is several years old. So I wonder if that is included in data or if anyone's ever looked at that.
I'm going to briefly address the second part of your question. New Leaf, New Life is doing an amazing job, and I just spoke at the Monroe County Council's Justice Fiscal Advisory Committee about the barriers that particularly people who were incarcerated experience, and that's a real need. The Community Foundation provided a grant to New Leaf, New Life for transitional housing because that is, it's a need, right? And especially if you have certain kinds of convictions, one of the things that we need to do is to work more with landlords to see if we can have some flexibility because a lot of property managers and landlords just automatically, they do a background check. If you have any kind of criminal background, you aren't eligible. So that's an issue. And I'm going to pass it along to Tatiana to answer the first part of your question.
Yeah, thanks for your question about data. So in short, yes. Every time that a person's entered into our data system, which just for informational purposes is called the Homeless Management Information System, commonly known as HMIS, they're given an assessment. Within that assessment, a case manager is asking, what caused your homelessness? So that information is being captured. I'm not sure necessarily for our public data dashboard if we would publicize all of those reasons per se, but we can generally say, it's because of rental or arrear issues, or it's because of domestic violence, or et cetera. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep. What the last one, and then we do need to move on.
I'm sorry, this was, you were mentioning categories, and I was just wondering if there's any tie to mental health or substance use on there also? Okay.
Yep, that is also on there.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Oh, Charlotte, all right. We'll make an exception for you. One last question.
My question is, what do you do about students? Where do they fit into the numbers? Because I know they gobble up some of the better available housing.
Well, in this community, students are a factor for sure. I guess, are you asking about specifically students who are experiencing housing insecurity, or just how do students affect the market? Yeah. Yeah. How does IU play into the community? I would say that we would love to have more IU participation in our work. We are willing partners. We don't have a lot of people from IU involved in the work that we do at this point. So we need to work on that too, and we hope that they are receptive to that. I was happy to learn recently that they are creating a full-time position to focus on their food pantry and basic needs at the university, so that's a good thing. But obviously, students impact this market in a very profound way, and a lot of the new housing that's coming on is geared towards the student market, so that's a big factor. All right, I am going to, sure.
It's about the prevention. One of the things if the agencies, if we worked more collaboratively, so what happens if you go to your trustee, then they may give you a list of places to go, and then you go to them, and so it becomes a job just trying to patch together the assistance. Why can't we maybe have one application form that we can use across agencies instead of them having to go to each agency and get an application and go through the process again, so that we're really changing the way we think about how we work together, so that our little part of this problem maybe would be a little more efficient and user-friendly, and not make patching it together a job in itself. That's my question.
That's more your comment too, I think.
Yeah, it was kind of a comment. Well, I had to squeeze that in.
Sure.
Because I had a little bit of time.
Yeah. No, I would categorize that as a thing that we need to work on. I think that's absolutely critical. I think the agents, I can't speak for the agencies, but I think that they would be receptive to that, and it would require just figuring out what the process is now and how it could be modified and who would take responsibility for that. And some communities have a one phone number to call as an entry point. That's kind of the same thing that you're talking about, where you have one place to apply and then somebody basically directs.
Whatever point you come in, that they can then connect with other people.
Yeah.
Take the lead in getting that person
Yep.
assisted.
Yeah. No, I think that and as a long-term goal, that's absolutely something to work towards. That's not a very satisfying answer. I know. I'm sorry. Did somebody?
We do have that set up throughout the city, and so people accessing coordinated entry have the same assessment that's done by every agency that's willing to do it. Not every agency is willing to do it, but the ones that do it, it's universal. So again, I'm not sure exactly which application
Yeah.
process or for what you're talking about, but as far as the
If
how.
they come to us and then they go, then I say maybe Salvation Army can help, and I make a contact with them, and they say they have to come in and fill out our
Talking
form.
about
And,
like rental assistance.
yeah, specific, or utility bills too. Both of those really
Yeah,
issues.
I think that's, yeah, based on previous conversations you and I have had, that it's a broader service as opposed to the coordinated entry process, which Forrest mentioned, it is, as the name implies, coordinated, in all the agencies who are moving people into shelter work together, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the slides, which I'm going to go back to now because we've just blown the agenda out the water. Thank you, everybody. That was a great discussion. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tatiana to talk about the second goal.
Thank you. We're going to be talking about making homelessness brief. All right, another community spotlight. So last fall, we started to develop, with the help of Deborah Meyerson in the back, let's give claps for Deborah, and Andrew Toohill of Toohill Consulting, to create a housing resource guide. This is an online resource guide that you can also print out at headinghomeguide.org. And essentially, this resource guide was created for people looking for low-income housing or other related services like transportation, food pantries, etc. And what was really unique about this specific resource guide is that it covers our 6-county region. So I don't know if we said earlier, but Heading Home is targeted at looking at Monroe County, Morgan, Greene, Owen, Lawrence, and Martin County. And this is live, has been live, I believe, since February. And we've been able to talk to all the different social service providers to ask to look at these resources, right? We know that resources come out of date all the time. There's always people's numbers changing. Based off funding, resources are changing. So Heading Home is committed to update this and expand this resource on a regular basis. So if you haven't already looked at it, we highly recommend you going to headinghomeguide.org. And if you see anything out of date, please let us know. We'd be happy to update it. But we're really thankful for Deborah Meyerson's work in the research process and getting all of the, I don't even know, hundreds of resources together to make this possible. Alrighty, strategy 1 says to shift from a housing readiness model to a housing first approach and rapidly rehousing those who have fallen into homelessness. one way that's being addressed is under Goal 2, Strategy 1, Objective 1, is to build support for Housing First. So we've been doing this in a plethora of different ways that we've just kind of categorized as education events similar to today's event. We've hosted multiple learning sessions with community organizations, faith-based groups. Last week, some of you were just at our business learning session about our housing security crisis response system. And this picture right here is actually a picture of one of our quarterly trainings that we host for frontline staff, caseworkers, social workers, and that's something that we're calling our cross-agency training committee, that we host quarterly trainings just to support their work. And our next one actually is going to be happening in September. So if you're interested, stay connected to us on social media, and those marketing details will be released shortly. But like Mary said, all of that we do is really collaborative. So a lot of these events have been in partnership with the South Central Housing Network and with other community partners. Alrighty, under Goal 2, Strategy 1, Objective 3, I'll give you a second if you're looking or following along with me. It says to routinely assess the need for rapid rehousing in the region. And this right here, this lovely person right here is Diana. Diana serves as our region's Director of Rapid Rehousing, which is housed under Beacon Inc. And we met with Diana and one of her case managers back in June to discuss what they're seeing in terms of the trends of the need for rapid rehousing, where gaps are, some challenges they face, and even some success stories as well. And we hope to do this on a regular basis. And Diana also serves as our region's HMIS, which is that data system I was talking about earlier, administrator. So she's a real integral part of giving people access to that system as people become new case managers or social workers for different agencies. We're really thankful for the work that they're doing. And just a fun data piece for you is that in May, 40 people moved into housing, which was a record-breaking number. And that was actually really largely in part because of Diana and her team's efforts in rapid rehousing. So we're really excited to see that, and we're hoping that we'll break that number even eventually as well. All right, another community highlight. These are 3 awesome street outreach workers who are actively talking to people on the streets experiencing homelessness, going into camps in the woods to assess people's needs, as well as to help get them into that coordinated entry system that Forrest was talking about earlier. So Goal 2, Strategy 1, Objective 4. This mic keeps going in and out. Please let me know if you can hear me or not, and I can switch to that mic. Is to invest in strategic outreach to people experiencing street homelessness that prioritizes housing for those individuals and households. So while there are a plethora of agencies working to do different forms of street outreach, these 3 individuals are our region's champions in being street outreach workers that are connecting people to housing, not just assessing their immediate needs, but also their long-term needs. So the first one is Bill Ferry. He works for Centerstone's PATH team. The middle is Margaret Van Schaik, who works for HealthNet and serves under Melissa Burgess, as Mary said earlier. And this is Hannah Gorman, who also works with HealthNet. Margaret and Hannah are doing they're not doing street medicine because they're street outreach workers, but they're working with a nurse practitioner and a psychiatric nurse to provide street medicine. So they're connecting individuals who have different healthcare needs to the professionals to meet those needs. And in addition to these 3 people that you see on the screen, we worked with other street outreach workers to create a street outreach policy last fall, because we realized that there are a lot of different agencies that are working to do street outreach, but we wanted to really create a streamlined approach to collaboration. Like we said, collaboration is key to everything that we do. So we got buy-in from all the different outreach workers and came up with some best practices in doing street outreach. So really thanks to these people, because they're the ones who are the boots on the grounds that we say. So we're really thankful for them and the work that they do. All right, strategy 5 is to ensure the most effective use of the VI SPDAT, coordinated assessment tool for supporting the entire continuum of those in need of housing. Mouthful. So VI SPDAT stands for Vulnerability Index Forrest, help me out. It's a long acronym. VI-SPDAT, Vulnerability Index. What's the S? Decision something tool. Yeah, okay, good. Thank you for bearing with me. Essentially, the VI-SPDAT is an assessment that I was talking about earlier, that when a person is entered into our coordinated entry system, they're entered through that assessment. So that assessment's looking at all the different vulnerabilities a person's experiencing, whether they're experiencing mental health illnesses, or whether they're experiencing substance abuse disorders, whether they're fleeing domestic violence, whether they have any chronic health conditions, as you can see, et cetera, et cetera. It assesses a person's vulnerability. And I just want to take a second to really shout out all the caseworkers and social workers who are doing that work, because obviously you can receive secondhand trauma from hearing about people's own trauma. So asking some of those complicated questions can be really heartbreaking at times. But it's important to know what people are going through to better assess how we can help them. So part of Heading Home's efforts in all of this is that we've been able to support some of our social service providers through our coordinated entry program. This past spring, I've been helping Wheeler Mission by completing coordinated entry intakes, or these assessments I'm telling you about, with some of their clients. As we know, Wheeler Mission is our biggest shelter, so for us to not have everyone who's at Wheeler Mission within our database, that creates data discrepancies, right? So we're trying to currently work through some logistics with them, because currently they use a different data system than the rest of our region. So we're trying to figure out how we can integrate those two systems to make sure that by name list I mentioned earlier is accurate and up to date and in real time. So as I also mentioned earlier, that Heading Home has taken a role in creating region-wide monthly data reports. So I'm looking at things within our data system that include, how many single adults are experiencing homelessness, how many total people are experiencing homelessness, how many people have returned from being homeless to being housed to being homeless again, how many people were moved to being inactive, right? They disappeared, they haven't had contact with their case manager. How many people have moved into housing? What type of housing is that they're moving into? Is it with a subsidy? Is it without a subsidy? Is it permanent supportive housing? Is it rapid rehousing, et cetera? So don't want to bore you too much, but the data is actually really interesting. So if you have specific questions about that, please let me know. And this whole slide addresses Goal 2, Strategy 5, Objective 1, which is utilizing the VI-SPDAT to identify the most vulnerable households in the region, to prioritize resources for those households, and create alternatives for those who do not qualify based on the assessment. So while I may be supporting the efforts of these local world changers, they're the ones really doing the work. This is their work every single day. They're talking to individuals, assessing their needs, working on identifying those needs or connecting those needs to resources. So shout out to all the case managers in our region. All right, and that was a shorter section than the first one. I'll open it up for questions, if anyone has any.
My question also kind of ties into some of the comments from the last section. It was just to get a better understanding or description of the people that do qualify for coordinated entry, and just confirming that those are people that are already considered homeless and what that definition is. Because I think with Bobby's question that was talking about coordinating, those would be for people that aren't homeless enough or aren't homeless yet.
That's a great question, Tanda. So just to clarify is that before someone's entered into our coordinated entry system, they have to have a verification of their homelessness, which typically involves either a case manager or social worker saying, hey, can you show me the last place you slept last night? Or if they have proof that they've stayed in shelter, typically that verification is that they've been homeless for 2 weeks, because sometimes there is that self-resolving that they're able to be diverted from shelter. Does that answer your question? Yeah, no problem.
You guys are amazing, Tatiana. Thank you. I keep going back to who's not at the table. And I know you said, or it was said earlier, that those with lived experience is being looked for. And I'm wondering what might be done to bring them to the table. Or to say it a different way, maybe not people that are currently on the street, but people live close to that edge. And I know, for instance, on the Housing Authority Board, they recently brought someone on the board who lives in the housing. And I'm just wondering, and the other group missing from the table, I think, and this is one, bless you, if you can make this happen. How do we get the university committed to helping address this problem?
Great questions. So for your first one, Mary mentioned earlier how we are currently in the process of onboarding 2 individuals with lived experience of homelessness. One individual is going to be serving on our Built for Zero cohort, which really encompasses a lot of the work that we do. Another one, I don't think she's identified yet which committee she wants to join, but we have an advocacy committee, we have a cross-agency training committee. Obviously that one is for someone who also works in the field of housing security to some degree. As well as there's a committee for the South Central Housing Network, just their board in general, and other community task force that may erupt, like our election committee, but right now obviously is dissolved, but will reconvene eventually. So we actually are currently onboarding people, and they should be starting this upcoming month. And I think I'll allow Mary to answer the second question.
One of the things that I've discovered is that a lot of the people who are doing this work, who are the social workers, the case managers, they have actually, many of them have also experienced housing insecurity, or in some cases homelessness. And so although they are not in the category of people that we would hire as consultants because they already have jobs, they look through that lens, and so that's been very powerful in some of the discussions that we've had. So I think that's important too. And then,
I don't know if you want to answer it. Okay, I'll answer that university question. Being a recent IU grad, but I would say that something that Mary and I have talked about with our interns, Lizzie Wright and Shay Berry, who will be back. We're happy to have them back next month. Is to do some research about what are IU students' housing security needs, right? Because there have been articles about students who are housing insecure, right? There are a lot of luxury apartments that are tailored to students, thinking that, oh, people have, FAFSA that's going to be covering them. They have parents who are going to be covering them, but there are a lot of students who are paying for their own schooling. A lot of students who don't have that additional support from their families. So I even know students who have experiencing housing insecurity. So I think that's our target to getting into the university, is showing IU, hey, this is the amount of students who you have who are housing insecure, who are cost burdened. Helping them see the need for their own population can help them see the need and how they're impacting our whole community.
So I guess my question would be, if the university is suddenly adding 2,000 or 3,000 more students to enrollment, that's going to both hit low-income people, but low-income students as well. Mm-hmm. And how do we better coordinate, or what responsibility does the university have? Maybe that's a simpler way to ask it.
Do you have something you want to say? Yes, but it's not related to this. It's a different question. Okay.
Great question, Phil. I think that is a real big philosophical question that is an important one, that I think that Mary and I really do value making more partnerships with the university to just start talking about those things. We don't want to go into the university and saying, hey, you should do this and you shouldn't do that. But instead, how can we partner, and how can we both see that we're both a part of the solution to strengthening housing security? Do you want to ask your question, Tina?
I'm totally changing subjects. And hopefully this falls in the category of brief. You mentioned the in many ways, in all versions of that word. So you mentioned that we're focused on veteran homelessness, right, as a first target with Built for Zero, right? The strategy of, addressing one population at a time and getting to functional zero. Can you help us understand, right, what comes after veterans, right? And the way that you stage some of that as it relates to, I think, the brief category.
Okay, sure. So, yes, that's a great question, Tina. So we are currently focusing on veterans. However, sorry, this is like ringing. I'll be trying to be quiet. Sorry, camera work. Thank you. Way better. So we are focusing on veteran homelessness. However, we're going to reconvene with our group about what's the next target population. That could be families. That could be people experiencing chronic homelessness. So those are the next populations that we hope to eventually work towards. Yeah, definitely. Everyone is still being prioritized. It's just that we have this special focus group who's also looking deeper into veterans experiencing homelessness.
This is probably more of a comment, but from the church's perspective, we have the opportunity to make a lot of referrals into the network, and that can be a particularly confusing thing for us to do, to know what organization we should refer folks to. So knowing about the coordinated entry is helpful, and this probably goes back to goal number 1 more than 2, but knowing what agencies are best suited. I don't know, like a flow chart or something like that, that we can give to our front office workers would be incredibly helpful, to be sure that folks are getting the referral that is most helpful for them.
I think that's a great question. I guess I would refer you to that headinghomeguide.org, only because there is a section that says find help here, and then you can filter based off of their need, right? So if they're looking for shelter, it then pulls up a whole table of all the shelters that are applicable, whether they're, a mom fleeing domestic violence or a single adult or a family, I would also just add that all of our shelters, Wheeler Mission sometimes uses coordinated entry, but besides that, all shelters use coordinated entry. So as long as they're getting connected to a case manager and they say, hey, I want to be in coordinated entry, and they're going to already be working to try to put them in. But they obviously have that choice whether to be added to coordinated entry or not. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for making homelessness brief? All right, I'll pass it back to Mary.
And the idea of a flow chart or some kind of other resource, that's a good one. I'm gonna tick that.
These have been incredible for us.
Yeah.
It's been incredible to hand out, but the next piece, being on the east side is not quite as helpful for us.
Right, it's focused on downtown. Mm-hmm.
And we are seeing more folks than we used to on the
Okay.
east side. But also just that sense of knowing their need, but I have some sense in training about how to do that, but my secretary who answers the phone does not.
Right.
So something that she can use, here's 5 questions you could ask, and then that would feed them into our specific network.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And just for everybody, on your table, there are these downtown resource guides, which are created by the city of Bloomington. Feel free to take them, take multiple ones and use them as you like. So now I'm going to go back to the podium. And final goal, making homelessness non-repeating. The first strategy, enhancing opportunities to obtain and maintain employment or income for those experiencing or at risk of homelessness. This objective related to that goal, expanding case management, financial advocacy, and payee representative services, etc. We see 2 main issues of need as priorities. One, we've talked about access to actual housing units, but the people portion, which we've talked about as well, is so critical for case managers, frontline workers, other staff at the townships or in agencies or really any organization to walk hand in hand. We just don't have enough people, and the people that we have are working so hard and are at risk of burnout. So one of the things that we've just talked about, and this is still in the very germination stage, is how can we develop some kind of community sponsorship for financially supporting case managers and increasing the number of case managers that we have in the community as one idea that relates to this objective. The other idea that is actually being implemented now in Bloomington Township is to increase the number of representative payees. Bloomington Township is currently the only township in Monroe County that is a representative payee, which means that they have staff who can, through the Social Security Administration, pay the bills and manage the money for certain people who need that kind of help. Other agencies and individuals have representative payee programs, but we see the big opportunity and a big need for this. So we're going to help. I just finished writing up an article about the Bloomington Township program and really trying to encourage other groups and individuals to take on this role. And institutions are important to be representative payees because they're not tied to the whims of life for an individual, right? So something might happen to an individual, and then it's quite a process to change the representative payee. Whereas if it's located at an institution like Bloomington Township, the people can change, but that township is still the representative payee, and other staff can fill in with a smooth transition. Strategy 2, to expand support for recently homeless individuals with substance use disorder. This is a big one, and again, in partnership. We helped facilitate a conversation about a possible recovery cafe in this area. This is the group that, or a portion of the group that came together to discuss this and included representatives from the Community Foundation, the Bloomington Health Foundation, Centerstone, there's somebody there, Dana Jones from Wheeler Mission, the Public Health Department for Monroe County, and others. There's interest in this because it's seen as an effective way, if people are in recovery, to really get the support they need. There are different models. It's something that's available in larger municipal areas. Indianapolis has several. We don't have any. So we held 2 meetings to talk about the different models and then migrated that conversation to the Monroe County Substance Use Disorder Awareness Commission. We felt that that was a better fit for that conversation to occur. Peter Iverson is the chair of that, a Monroe County counselor, and they're going to be bringing in some people from other communities who have stood up the recovery cafes and other models to talk about what might work here in Monroe County. And that was a super short section. So I'm going to open it up now, and just as a reminder we're going to be talking a little bit after we debrief on Goal 3. We're going to be talking about some of the other work that we're doing that is not specifically called out in the plan, but related to the plan. So any feedback on this very short section? Yes. Coming to you.
I am concerned that there's nothing about mental health, and we hear a lot of concerns about access to mental health across the economic spectrum, and obviously substance abuse and mental health kind of are partnered, but I know HealthNet is working in that area, but I'm interested that there's no strategy for making homelessness non-repeating that has anything to do with mental health. Do you have any thoughts? Like, maybe this goal is still in development, but I'm just interested in that.
I think this might reflect the need to update the plan, right? Because there are things that have maybe emerged as more crucial or more urgent since the plan was developed. And I think you're right. We have a lot of discussions around mental health issues and the need for more outreach, more case managers. There is the Stride Center downtown, which I'm sure you're aware of, that Centerstone operates. So that was something that was a community collaborative that was spearheaded by Cook Medical, but also included support from IU, the Community Foundation, and others. So I guess I would say that we are acutely aware of this challenge. and talking with partners about the needs, and it is a tough nut to crack. I know that the decision makers who are allocating funds, not to call you out, Penny, but the Monroe County Commission, Monroe County Council in particular are very aware of these needs, and I think that's good feedback. Not a satisfying answer again, but okay. Yeah.
Thanks so much for the updates. And this actually is piggybacking on the business discussion from last week. A really interesting piece of the conversation was the statistic that was shared about how 90% of individuals who are homeless, it's a one-time brief situation, and then 10% is very chronic. Many times that's very visible, what we may see outside, on the street. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how Heading Home is trying to address those populations differently. One, it seems like, for the layperson, they may not realize the 90%, because they only see what they see. And then two, it seems like the individuals, the 10% with the chronic issues, one, that it's a large need for resources for those individuals, as well as that may also have a greater impact on the community around them. Could you talk about how you're approaching those populations in different ways?
Sure, and the first thing I will say is that, again, we're not a direct service provider, so more of what we're doing is looking at those needs, and I might kick it over to Forrest, since he is the shelter person in the room, to basically address this question of, we have a higher visibility of a smaller section of people experiencing homelessness. So by and large, I'm sure most of you in this room know that the vast majority of people who experience homelessness, it is brief, it is non-recurring, it is not visible. These are people who maybe are sleeping in their cars or sleeping in places where we would consider not fit for human habitation, but people live where they can. But there is a portion of the population of people experiencing homelessness who are very visible, maybe have substance use disorder or mental illness or both. And that is a challenge that I don't think our community, or frankly any other community in the nation, has figured out the best way to address. Because people have agency too, right? So you might even offer people services, but they may not be ready to accept those services or participate in recovery or treatment. So that's another factor. And I know that Forrest could speak more eloquently to this if you're interested. Okay.
The Housing First model began addressing that 10% population. That's kind of where it started, with the idea that that there was a significant percentage of people experiencing homelessness who basically die in homelessness if we don't jump in. And prior to that, homelessness had been built, and homeless services had been built primarily on what I would call a housing readiness model, or a shelter first model, where you shelter people and you try and make them better, and then they find housing on their own. They figure it out and they improve, and that works to some degree with a certain amount of folks. But it left this permanent, if you will, underclass of people experiencing homelessness until death. And so what we call Housing First is kind of expanded in its understanding and definition over time to more of a kind of it's not just referring to what we now call permanent supportive housing. It's more of a philosophical approach to homeless services that is distinct from housing readiness, in the sense that our Housing First is what we want. We want to try and get people housed and then help them improve their lives while they're in housing, as opposed to stop that process, because we know housing works for everyone. In terms of statistically, you're more likely to succeed if you're in a home. It makes everything easier and more supportive. So for this particular population, that's true for them too. Housing makes their lives more capable. They're more able to succeed. They're more able to do well. We know, and again, just throwing out random numbers, but we know for that chronic homeless population, we know, again, these I love these 90-10, all kind of things, but about 90% of those we can successfully house. And so over time, they succeed in housing. And housing first, again, and permanent supportive housing, there's that word supportive. So it's not just housing, you actually have to provide the resources to help them stabilize in housing and succeed and do well in housing. You use a voluntary model of service support, and the reason you use that is because coercion just leads them back to the bushes. And just doesn't work. So there's data about that making mandates doesn't. The only thing that mandates do is they remove people from the program. So it doesn't improve outcomes or help things. So that's sorry, am I taking too much time? You're walking over here, but that's the core of it. It's permanent supportive housing is a successful model for that population, and truthfully, if we had the investment we needed for that population, we could nationwide we could end 90% of street homelessness now. The other 10% is more complicated because their problems are more severe to a level where housing stability might not be possible for them right now. But again, that's a tiny percentage of the overall whole homeless population, that small amount that we can't help that way.
Thank you. And so that speaks to some of our efforts that we're planning for helping fund additional case managers, figuring out ways that we can have more people in the system that are helping address those chronic. What?
Oh, I was going to say, I guess it is a question. I thought maybe you cut off what you were saying. The question about hiring more case managers in order to make homelessness non-repeating and brief. I'm wondering if, and it kind of ties into some other comments about coordinating efforts and requesting a flow chart of services. Is there a way that those case managers could be collaborative or overarching and not just in a particular nonprofit agency that might have restrictions on what populations they can serve? Because I might be a case manager at one entity that can only serve people once they've been, meet that 14-day homeless criteria. I might be a case manager in an agency that can only provide services if you live within a certain boundary. Like, could we be looking at that, and maybe even be looking at what the health department is doing, at maybe even looking at navigators?
Yeah, I think navigators, and that is something through the community. What is the acronym for CHIP? Community Health Improvement Plan. I think that's a great idea. Again, it's a sustainable funding source that is the question. There's a fair amount of collaboration already amongst the different agencies and caseworkers, and somebody will call if they can't address a need, they call another agency, and so I think that there is a lot of that's happening already. One of the things that we're trying to do is to create more opportunities for case managers and frontline workers to get to know each other. So the quarterly trainings that we host, one of the things that's really benefit for that, I think, is it just brings people in the room. So the training is good, but also just being able to talk to each other and meet each other. And people are coming from Morgan County and Lawrence County, and so we're getting some more regional collaboration. And so those kinds of opportunities are trying to address that, but I think navigators would be a great idea if we can find the funding source. Okay, I am going to move on because we have a final piece that I just wanted to breeze through in the few minutes we have remaining. We were doing work that is not specifically called out in the plan, and we are going to ram through these very quickly, but I will also say that Tatiana and I are very easy to reach, and very eager to talk to any community group or individual or organization that would like us to come and also just answer questions or talk about what we do. So we have heard that some community leaders in other counties don't believe that homelessness or housing insecurity affects them. We had a convening in Lawrence County last year, and where some of the community elected officials raised a question about whether there was even any homelessness in Lawrence County. So we're working with IU Professor Laura Littlepage, who's doing some research in there, and our goal is to have a report that we can deliver to that community and tell them what the actual situation on the ground is, and so that they can then make decisions about their resources. We have a range of advocacy efforts. Hopefully you heard about the candidate forum that we hosted for mayoral candidates in the city of Bloomington earlier this year. It was really well attended at the Boys and Girls Club, and it was focused on low-income housing and homelessness. We did a similar, we did a session for council candidates too, and we see that this is really kind of an educational process for our future elected leaders, that we want to make sure those issues are elevated. We provide support for the South Central Housing Network Advocacy Committee, which meets monthly, and we're trying to empower people in the community to give public commentary at public meetings about housing issues that relate to them or to their organization or to the community in general, because we feel like the more that people talk about these issues, the more pressing it becomes for our decision makers, and the more collaborative it becomes, because this is not an issue. Housing insecurity is not an issue that should just fall on the backs of the nonprofit agencies that serve low-income families and individuals or government. We feel like it's a community solution that's needed. And then this is one of our more higher profile connections with IU. The Kelly Institute for Social Impact, or KISI, at IU has an annual case competition, and we were the community partner this year. This is the winning team who is working with us over the summer to develop an anti-stigma campaign, and we're going to have a series of events in November during Hunger and Homeless Awareness Week. And we received $10,000 to implement these student proposals. So this has been a good experience, and also during the process of talking with students, other teams learning like, oh yeah, these students themselves have a need for education and awareness and anti-stigma work. So we're excited about that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tatiana to talk about the people of housing security.
Alrighty, so you'll see some of these individuals on your table. These are features that we have done of people working in the field of housing security. So back during our Heading Home celebration in October of last year, we had a lot of different people in the room, and it kind of just inspired me to learn more about these individuals, learn what drives them, what motivates them, why they do the work that they do. So basically, every week we have a featured individual under this People of Housing Security story, that they have a story that's posted on our blog about themselves and the work that they do. We have a newsletter that's dedicated to sharing these stories. And we just think it's a really great way to celebrate the individuals and the work that they're doing, but also to educate the greater community about all of these individuals working to strengthen housing security. We started this in January, and since January we have officially done 24 highlights, and we hope to continue it indefinitely because these people are worth celebrating and their work is worth recognizing. And you'll even see some of these individuals in the room. You see Tanda Radawan, who we highlighted earlier, Martha Shedd in the back that you see. Who else is in the room? And Deborah Meyerson. So we're just really thankful for the work that these individuals do, and we are happy to celebrate them. And if you don't already, we highly recommend you going to our blog and binging these stories the same way that you would binge something on Netflix. They're really interesting individuals. So lastly, we just want to share some ways that you can stay connected to us. So as I said a second ago, we have newsletters. We have a general newsletter that goes out on a monthly basis the first week of every month that just has news regarding to housing security within our region. And the second week of each month, we highlight those monthly features of people of housing security. And then the third week is dedicated to just sharing ways that people can get active in our region, whether through volunteer work or advocacy work. And if you didn't already know, Heading Home has social media pages. Follow us on social media. Follow us right now, right now. Go to Instagram, go to Facebook. You can find us there. And then lastly, we have our news site, which we host just different articles about the work being done, whether through Heading Home or through our community partners. That's posted on a weekly basis. And I will pass it back to Mary. Thank you all.
So I'd just like to conclude by saying this is serious work, but we also try to have fun while we're doing it. And this is a picture of our Dot and I and our 2 interns. We feel like we try to approach the work with joy and optimism. It is hard work. And we are so grateful for all of the agencies and individuals and government folks and everyone who is in it to address this problem in a significant way. We are grateful to be part of that work, and we're grateful that you are in it as well by coming here today, learning more, and being partners with us. So we have hit our time. We are happy to stay here after and have conversation with you, but I just want to be respectful of your time. There's a lot of work still to do, but we hope that we've shown that we are committed to working in many aspects of this very challenging situation. Thank you for coming.